Hi there, everybody. So, you may have seen today lots of people, lots of teachers, are, to be frank, um, absolutely furious, particularly with the SQA. Lots of young people have also been chipping in on this, and they're absolutely right to. They're expressing their entirely justified anger at what has unfolded over last night and the course of today. I've been asked a few times today to explain what's going on to people in different kind of contexts. So I thought it might be maybe kind of useful to just do this, just a quick explanation of what exactly is going on and why teachers in particular are so angry about this. So here goes. Very quick recap. Back to 2020, lockdowns imposed in March 2020, and the exams for that year need to be cancelled. Teachers submit grades for their students, but the SQA and the SNP try to manipulate those grades in order to protect the historic distribution of grades. They say this is to keep things fair, but the truth is they're targeting the poorest schools in Scotland, or the schools serving the poorest areas of Scotland, for grade reductions in order to keep their spreadsheets and their graphs in line. They insist, this, as I say, about fairness and credibility. It simply isn't true. They eventually U-turned after a campaign from young people. John Swinney, the then Education Secretary, did apologise in Parliament, but the SQA point blank refused to do so. Didn't think that anything had happened, didn't think they'd done anything wrong. Nobody lost their jobs. Nobody faced any serious accountability for what they had done to young people. A few weeks later, the new school year starts, and exams, allegedly, are supposed to be going ahead. Now, that lasts until October, when National 5 exams are cancelled, and in December, the higher and the advanced higher exams follow. Both decisions, by the way, should have actually happened in the August, and the failure to cancel the exams in the August is actually an extremely serious one that's been underappreciated and actually underreported, but nonetheless. Now, this bit's quite crucial. The exams that were due to take place in May 2021, they were cancelled by December 2020. And this was because there had already been so much disruption to education by that point that it didn't matter what happened after December. Exams couldn't go ahead fairly. It simply was not possible. But the SQA was in a huff, and they took it out on pupils via a system called demonstrated attainment, which was really just the thing that created what you might remember from last year, which was a system of exams in disguise and kids being ground through assessment after assessment to produce the paperwork that was going to allow their teacher to convince the SQA to actually accept the grade that your kids deserved. So now on to this school year, and where are we? Well, between August 2021 and December 2021, school pupils faced at least as much disruption as they had done the year previous, but this time exams weren't cancelled. And this wasn't because this year exams would magically just become fair, when they weren't going to be fair last year under the exact same circumstances. But rather it's because the SQA and the Scottish Government, which is now of course the SNP and the Greens together, were, it seems, absolutely determined that they were going to force kids back into the exam hall. This was, by any measure it seems, the priority this year. This looks for all the world like the thing that mattered most. Get the kids back in the exam hall. We certainly can't have another year where we don't run exams, because let's face it, folks, we can't have a system whereby people actually see that this antiquated exam system isn't really necessary. So this is all about pretending everything's normal, but also about re-establishing and protecting the status quo, and that's really been the goal since the start of all this. But there's an obvious problem here, and that's that even the SQA and the government could see that exams weren't going to be fair. There had been so much disruption already. Enough disruption that a year before, the exams had been cancelled. So what were they going to do this time? How were they going to make exams fair when they hadn't been the year before? And it was the same kind of circumstances. The answer to that was the SQA's exam support material. Now, that brings us up to today, or rather it brings us up to last night, because the material actually went online then and started to kind of trickle out. So a couple of people messaged me about it, had figured out how to actually access it all, and I put a thing on Twitter. It then took a school pupil, an MSYP, to actually collate it all and do the SQA's job for them last night, so much so that eventually the SQA sent out this panicked tweet apologising that the stuff had gone online. Not apologising for the content, which we're going to come to. Now, The support was always going to, it was always meant to be, as they said, different for different subjects. Some were going to get told exam content, either what is or is not going to be in the paper. Some were going to get some kind of study guide that was ill-defined, and some students were going to be allowed to take notes into the exam with them. This material was being billed as the thing to ensure that exams were fair. This was the thing that was going to solve this problem of last year, disruption meant exams were unfair and we cancelled them. This year, we've got the same disruption, but we're not prepared to cancel exams. How do we bridge that gap? We bridge it with apparently this exam support material. That is what this was for. The material is, and I say this as somebody who not only knows a lot of teachers and so has been getting messages for, and we're on nearly 24 hours now, who woke up this morning with hundreds of notifications about it, but I also say it as somebody who teaches, okay? This material is categorically, undeniably, and actually, if you're used to the SQA, probably inevitably, a complete failure. I really cannot overstate how much of a failure this is. A couple of subjects, maths is one of them, have been given more help than most, which actually is raising other issues because the stuff being taken out in maths, what if that's the stuff you're really good at? How's that fair? But for the most part, these documents are useless at best and extremely insulting and maybe even making things more complicated at worst. Some of them, I'm not even joking here, some of them literally include advice that's things like remember to spell words properly and read the questions and 6 marks means make 6 points. There's nothing in them that a half-competent teacher hasn't already covered over and over again. And I appreciate that for the SQA, aspiring to be half as competent as an average teacher probably feels like this great big goal for them, right? But that's not really an acceptable situation for the rest of us to be in. This was supposed to be the material making things fair this year. This was the stuff that was going to mitigate all that disruption. Last year we mitigated it by cancelling exams. This year we're going to mitigate it with exam support material. And not just disruption, remember, by the way, over the last, say, 6 months, but the kids sitting their exams just now have had 2 years of disruption. They were in 4th year when this kicked off, you know. And where are we? Failure. Just failure. That is what the SQA has given us. Complete categoric failure. The SQA has failed and the SNP and Green government has failed. And the people they've failed are our kids. It is that simple. They have completely failed our kids. 2022 exams, they were never really going to be fair, right? But the best case scenario was that they weren't so obviously unfair. That was the big thing I suppose we were aiming for. But that sort of hinged on this material being brilliant. I mean, it had to be amazing. Or at least it had to be, at least as good as something a teacher could have made themselves. But it isn't brilliant. It's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And this is not a surprise. As I said, for those of us who know the SQA, it's not a surprise because the SQA is a fundamentally incompetent organisation. It is an organisation that has never been competent in its 20 odd years of existence. And now our kids are paying the price for that. The people running it were quite clearly emboldened by the fact they got away with 2020 with no consequences, got away scot-free, kept their cushy jobs, kept their massive, massive salaries. There were absolutely no ramifications at all, and they've clearly taken that as a sign that they can pretty much do what they want. And actually, the full situation is even worse than this because they have also rigged the appeals system against young people. Young people, parents, everybody was told young people would be able to directly appeal any grade they were not happy with. We now know that's not true. Lots and lots of kids are going to be prevented from appealing because of the way in which estimated grades are being used for gatekeeping and as a barrier. So even that doesn't solve the problem here. We are in a situation where there's no getting away from this. The easiest way to understand the situation is to view the SQA as a body that is hostile to both young people and to the teaching profession. One where the top priority is protecting itself, even if that means sacrificing young people's futures. And to compound it all, when the Education Secretary finally deigned to comment on this today, she came out and she backed the SQA. Of course she did. Dismissing teachers who I can assure you, I promise you, know more about this than she does, and, to be blunt, turning her back on young people. And again, maybe this shouldn't have been a surprise after what we've seen in the last couple of years. But it's still pretty devastating. It's still the sort of thing that, why are people so angry? Why are teachers angry? Why are young people angry? Because they are right to be angry, because this situation is unacceptable, because pupils have been failed, teachers are furious about how they and their pupils have been treated, and both the SQA and the Scottish Government think that you're all idiots, think that you can't see all this, and want you to believe that everything is fine. They want you to believe that everything's going to be okay. They want you to stop asking the hard questions, and they want, above all else, to protect the status quo, even if they have to do so at the expense of thousands and thousands of young people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. It is without doubt a scandal. It is without doubt an absolute disgrace. The fact the SQA are now trying to blame others for this as well is absolutely appalling, but again unsurprising given their track record. So, that's where we stand. We were promised something that would make exams fair. They have failed. We were promised an appeal system that would address that. That isn't happening either. Too bad, young people. You're just not important enough, apparently, to merit being treated fairly by Scotland's government or its only exam body. Sorry about that.